Today's topic is bullying among older adults. Robin Boniface is a professor at Indiana State School of Social Work. Robin is the author of Bullying Among Older Adults: How to Recognize and Address an Unseen Epidemic. Robin received her master's and doctoral degrees in social work from the University of Washington. She was named the John A. Hartford Faculty Scholar in Geriatric School of Social Work in 2011. As a social gerontologist, she is focused on long-term care, elder abuse, and the resilience of older adults. On behalf of the Aging and Disability Resource Center, the State Unit on Aging, and the Colorado Elder Rights and Abuse Prevention, please welcome Robin Boniface. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me and for bringing me out to Denver. I forgot to forward the good weather, so sorry that it's cold and snowing today, but anyway, it's only May, so it's not like it's getting close to summer or anything. I wanted to share with you my work on bullying among older adults. Waiting for my slides to move forward so they will coincide with you. I think they're working on getting the clicker to work. But from memory, we'll see how much I remember about my slides. I want to cover several different things during our time together. First of all, to spend some time talking about what are the characteristics of bullying among older adults. What tends to happen in this age group? What are the characteristics of people who bully themselves? What are the factors that seem to be associated with that? And then what are the characteristics of people who are bullied in later life? And what are the factors associated with that? What type of behaviors tend to occur? What are the impact of those behaviors on people's emotional and physical well-being? And then after we have a good understanding of that, to move ahead and talk about interventions that are being tried across the country to help address this issue. And there'll be points throughout the presentation for you to be able to have some input about what you're struggling with in your work, the kinds of things that your clients struggle with, and to ask questions as well and do some brainstorming. I can probably advance the slides from back here. Oh. Okay, very good. All right, so what else do I have here? Oh, yes. Also, just some basic ideas how to recognize when bullying may be going on. For most of the time, you're going to see it or you're going to hear about it, but sometimes that's not the case. So I like to let people know when I first begin the presentation that really very little research has been done on bullying among older adults. So we don't have a whole wealth of random controlled studies or anything like that on this phenomenon. So my presentation is based on 3 sources of information because I want you to know where the information comes from. So first is my research studies, which took place in assisted living. And they were 2 assisted living facilities, good-sized facilities in a metropolitan area serving a low-income population with a high level of mental health conditions, a high level of substance abuse. Many veterans lived there. So there's a lot of PTSD in the population, and then it was both older adults and younger people with disability. So that's the population that my research was done in. And then it's also based on practice experience, working with individuals and organizations who are struggling with senior bullying. So not just my own work, but the work of my colleagues and talking with them and with people across the country, not only providers, but people actually experiencing bullying about what it's like for them and what they're struggling with. And then the research literature on bullying in other population groups. So even though we don't have too much yet on older adults, we have stack this high of research studies on bullying among youth and children in the school systems. So we know a lot about bullying in that age group. We know a lot about bullying in the workplace. And we know a lot about bullying that takes place in prisons. And that research literature can help inform our understanding of what may be going on with older adults as well. So it's these three sources that guide the information I'm presenting to you today. So who here has ever been bullied? Raise your hand. So a lot of people, including myself. So when I ask that question to a group, usually anywhere from 20 to 30% of the audience raise their hand. So it's a fairly common phenomenon that we experience. So for those of you who are comfortable sharing in this setting, when did it take place? Were you in school? Were you in the workplace? Yes. Oh, we need our microphone. I think people are aware this is being live streamed, so people need to hear that there's somebody up front. Yeah, of course, I don't tell you that until after you volunteer to speak. Yeah, maybe that's a type of bullying, I don't know.
That's okay. My name is Ruth Montoya Starr, and I'm a building rep in a community for older adults. And I've seen it firsthand. I'm a registered nurse by training, and because of what's happened to me and several other people, a provision in their policy is being made, and so that'll come up next month. And but it's so uncomfortable because it's a resident in the building that I'm in, and my husband and I are both there. We are taking care of my dad, who's 88, and so we're his assistants to living in community that he likes and he's comfortable with. But the repercussions from that is we have the access to the same older adults who have high level of mental illness and dementia. And a couple of people in particular have problems with anybody who has a title, which is just communication. So there's not as if I have any control over their behavior or the contents of their where they live in the community, but it's the idea of who I am in that little concept of that larger building. And so it's impacted my dad and my husband, and I've called DPD out. That's the police department, because there isn't any services that I am aware to help people when they're in that situation. But that did work, and the person understood what they were doing was harassment, and I've not had it since, and I really didn't want to do that. But sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, sometimes you have to take action.
That's
so
right.
You're experiencing bullying right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thank you. So anyone else? So when did the bullying occur for you?
I went to the Air Force Academy when they were first allowing women there, and the whole culture there was about bullying the women that were accepted in the first years, and I understand it still is that way. And one of the things that they did starting right off the bat when you're in basic training was to chant chants that have to do with keeping cadence during marching that were about women and about how some dogs have fleas, some dogs have rabies. Here at the academy, our dogs have babies, and things like that. That's verbal bullying to really set women in their place quickly. And it was done in front of all leadership, and that was considered normal.
Yeah, so it was like sanctioned bullying, yes. Yes, thank you for sharing. That just reminded me of when they first allowed women to enter one of the military institutions, and the other students wore shirts that had a negative comment about women, and very much bullying. So, thank you. Anyone else like to share when it happened? Maybe we can raise hands. How many of you was in school? Yeah, so for people online, it's about about maybe 15% of the audience. How about in the workplace? Okay, well, that wasn't me. I'm just telling you to raise your hand. But there was maybe about 8 people that raised their hands. How about when you were in prison? Oh, nobody's raising their hand on that one. So I guess I'm in a safe environment. So many in the schools, many in the workplace, and then we heard about being bullying as a woman in a primarily male institution, and bullying going on right now in a senior housing situation, right?
Well, it's not senior.
It's not housing.
Older adults.
Old,
Older adults.
active older adults. Okay, well, thank you for sharing. So we typically think about bullying as occurring in the school systems. When you mention that phrase, that's automatically what goes into people's mind. But really, it appears to occur across the lifespan, from children to young adults, middle adults, and older adults. So it seems wherever people congregate, this type of behavior becomes apparent. Yep. So I want to share with you the definition of bullying so we're all clear what we're talking about during our time together. So it's defined as intentional, repetitive, aggressive behavior involving an imbalance of power or strength. So it always involves, somebody's on top here, domineering over another person. It's that type of dynamic. And even though the definition says it's repetitive, so it has to occur more than once, I've certainly found in my research and in my discussions with people across the country that just a one-time incident of bullying can have serious negative consequences for older adults. So an example I like to share occurred for a woman who had moved away from her hometown and raised her family, did her job and all of that. And after she retired, she decided to move back to her hometown. And she was so looking forward to reconnecting with people and forming a social network and all of that. And she thought, well, what better way to do that than go to the senior center? So she went to the senior center, tried to join into a fun-looking activity group that was happening there. And lo and behold, every seat was taken. Every time she tried to sit down, somebody would say, well, no, you can't sit there. So she'd try another one. Well, no, you can't sit there either. Well, no, you can't sit there either. And it wasn't really that anyone was sitting in the chairs. It's just that people did not want to allow her to join into the group. It was very, very unwelcoming. She was shunned and excluded and felt very, very badly about that, left the senior center and never went back, and had a very negative view of the people there. And because of that one incident, and of course it was multiple people during that one episode saying, no, you can't sit there, no, you can't sit there. She lost the opportunity to socialize at the senior center, so it had a very strong impact. Relational aggression is also something to be aware of. It's one of the most common forms of bullying that takes place among older adults, and it's a non-physical aggression. So it doesn't involve hitting or kicking or pushing, but what it is behaviors that are intended to damage peer relationships or social connections. So the woman that tried to go to the senior center, tried to join into group and was not allowed to join in, that's relational aggression. And we see that again and again. Is that the kind of thing that's going on at the place that you're talking about? Is it relational aggression? My colleague.
Sure. It's really interesting because I serve on a volunteer organization for older adults, and I'm the chairperson, and it's a volunteer. And she tried to call every place that I work at, and she called the church that I'm a Stephen minister at. And so every place that I have a connection, she's called to complain about my behavior and how I'm not taking care of my dad and how it is he's tied up in the bedroom. So what would you call that?
It seems to be it's certainly a social type of bullying, a verbal bullying. I mean, nobody's hitting you or kicking
No,
you. It's just
no.
these other types of
Every time
behavior.
she sees me, it was an attack.
Yeah, a
And-
verbal attack.
Yes.
Yeah. So, thank you. And the example back here of what we heard of in the military institution, definitely relational aggression. It's designed to prevent the women from becoming part of the group or feeling like they're part of the group. So we divide the types of bullying into 3 different categories. There's verbal, there's physical, and then the antisocial or the relationship centered. So what I mean by that, verbal is your name calling, teasing, insulting, taunting people, making threats, and then pointed jokes targeting specific individuals. So it's not just telling jokes, but pointed jokes that are targeted towards someone specific, like what you experienced at the military institution, where women were called dogs and those sorts of things. I mean, it's a joke made specifically at somebody. So, if there's, you're sitting around the table and there's one or a couple people with large body size and people are making fat jokes, that's what I mean. Physical bullying is just like it sounds. It's pushing, hitting, pinching, kicking, those sorts of things, but also destroying property and stealing. And very sadly, sometimes what we see in this category is aggression towards people's pets. So somebody's walking by with their little dog and another person will whack at the dog with a cane or something like that. We've certainly seen those types of behaviors. And then the antisocial is shunning, excluding, like the person who was at the senior center experienced, gossiping, spreading rumors, and nonverbal body language. So sometimes what we see is mimicking somebody's, if they have a speech impediment, mimicking someone who has a foreign accent, or mimicking somebody's, like if they have a tic, or if they have a maybe a mobility impairment, walk with a limp or something like that, mimicking the way they walk, the way they move, as a way to make fun of them. So these are some examples of the people in my research talking about what they experienced from their peers, just to give you more of an idea. There's one that tries to be the #1 tough guy. He comes up to me and says, "One of these days I'm going to smack you with a hammer." So this is a verbal threat that this gentleman experienced on a regular basis. Somebody who lived in the building with him would often come up to him, get right in his face, and one of these days I'm going to hit you with a hammer. And he was very fearful of that, and we don't know if the gentleman actually had a hammer or any intention to actually follow through on his threat, but just the threat was very frightening to this individual, and he often worried about, is this going to be the day when he gets me? This next one, he calls me fatso. He says, "Hey, fatso." Then as he goes down the hall, he would make oinking noises as they went to the elevator. So this is a woman who was large body size, and gentlemen constantly ridiculing her for that, to the point of, oinking like a pig when she went by, and she was, exposed to that on a regular basis. So both of these things, very, very traumatic for them. And I think one of the things that's especially challenging for older adults when these types of behaviors occur in assisted living or in retirement housing or in the nursing home, it's happening in the place where they live, and so they can't get away from it. Every day they're exposed to it, and yes, they go to bed at night and all of that, but it's still happening in their home. And for children, at least they get to go home at the end of the day. And when we're bullied at work, at least we get to go home in the end of the day, and that's not the same for older adults when it's occurring in their living environment. So what are some of the things that the people you work with experience? What seems to be the most problematic? Here comes the microphones.
So I work with older adults too. Many of them are in nursing homes. A lot of the behaviors are, some of my participants are the ones bullying the other individuals and just name calling, cornering people with walkers, just yelling and stuff like that. And I think some of the problems I've seen is a lot of the people have dementia, and when there's interventions and sort of de-escalation with the bullying, some of the individuals don't necessarily remember that they were doing these things, and it's just occurring a lot, just yelling, name calling.
What kind of names do they call each other? Unless it's indecent. I mean,
It is indecent, so I don't
So
wanna-
they're calling each other like swear word type names.
Yeah, swear
Yeah.
words. So, yeah, that's just a lot of the behaviors, cornering people with walkers.
Yeah, so name
Yeah.
calling and then like just blocking people
Yeah.
with their mobility aids.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's what I've seen. So,
Yeah, thank you. Other examples of what's happening with the people you're working with?
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Allen Jacobus, and I'm Senior Health Initiatives Colorado. I am a former state ombudsman. Worked through DRCOG when we had a lot of volunteers working in the organization. And sometimes the bullying we see is actually where the resident in the nursing home is complaining about one of the caregivers. And that would have been an issue. And the one thing to kind of answer the lady up front's concern about her father is that the ombudsman does serve many roles. And one of the roles would be to try to get together with the administrative staff and the family and try to work these things out. Lay it out on the table and see if they can do a care services program and see if they could answer some of those concerns that you have about an older person. Because it's really important to listen and then form a plan of action and work it out together. But it's been a number of years since I've been an ombudsman. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the Ombudsman program is a very useful and helpful resource in nursing home settings. And I don't know if in Colorado you can access the Ombudsman from assisted living, or is it just nursing homes?
Our jurisdiction, this is Leah McMahon, State PACE Ombudsman. Our jurisdiction is currently assisted living homes, nursing homes,
Good.
and now over the last 2 years, the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad to hear, because it's such a wonderful resource and help. Anyone else like to share what they're struggling with the people that you're working with? Ooh, there's lots. Good.
Certainly, what people have mentioned before is all relevant, but I think one of the more troubling things is sometimes reports that some older participants are making sexualized comments to others.
Yes.
That are not welcome or maybe only partially welcome.
Yeah, so with the verbal abusive comments that are of a sexual nature. Yes.
So what I see and hear from my participants is that there's a lot of the gossip that's going on. So people feel excluded from, like a lot of the senior buildings will have potlucks once a week or once a month. And there's so much gossip going on that some people don't feel welcome at those. A lot of that's going on.
Yeah, and they're not spreading good rumors. It's negative rumors. I know in the work that I did, it was a lot of gossip about people's sexuality and their relationships. So it was similar to what you just shared, where it was about, who's sleeping with who, and, who's loose, those kinds of things. And it was really very uncomfortable for people. Yes.
Something that I see a lot, and I work with the Jefferson Center Senior Reach program, is that relational bullying, where, similar to what they had just said, the verbal comments, saying nasty things, making people feel uncomfortable to even go to certain parts of their buildings, yes, and feeling very isolated, like they're stuck in their apartment, and it's very problematic. I see that a lot.
Yes, and the feeling of isolation is very real when you're having rumors spread about you and all these gossip. That's, just gives people this opinion of you that's not at all based on reality and very unflattering. It's very, very hard to listen to that. And then for the people in my studies, they were in low-income assisted living, and there's not a lot of options when you are low-income assisted living, and so they felt tied to their place, that they couldn't go anywhere else. And then why should you move from your home that you like, apart from bullying? Did I see another hand, or is it just people stretching? Okay, there's one more.
Actually, I think I'm bullying, and I think it because when I'm working with some of the people with dementia that I'm working with, when they're talking, they'll say the same sentence or the same statement as many as 11, 12, 13 times in a row. Mm-hmm. I get really frustrated because I don't even have a clue when they're going to stop repeating themselves. And I'm trying to get something done. I have a time frame, and I interrupt. And then they get really angry at me for interrupting. And shrieking in anger happens, and it's all just because they don't know they're repeating themselves constantly.
Yes.
And so I come across as a bully because I interrupted. And I feel bad about it, and I don't know how to deal with that. So that's why I came to this meeting today.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you shared that. And a couple of you have mentioned dementia-related behaviors. So I think it's probably a good time in the presentation to talk about that. So we have bullying and other antagonistic behaviors, and then we have dementia-related behaviors. And those things are very, very different. Even though they might be the same behaviors. And you probably think, oh, Dr. Boniface, you don't make any sense in what you just said. But the reason that they're different is because they come from a very different motivation. If you remember at the very beginning of the presentation when I talked about the definition of bullying, it's one person domineering over another. It's based on power and control, and the other person trying to get control or power over another. Whereas in dementia-related behaviors, that's typically not at all what's happening. The person with dementia has cognitive deficits. They can't interpret their environment. They have poor memory. And so they do things in an attempt to, because they're frightened. They act out because they're trying to protect themselves. They're repeating themselves because they don't realize that they do. So there's not that dynamic of power and control. But the person on the receiving end of either type of behavior, whether it's dementia-related behavior or actually meeting the definition of bullying, it still feels like they're being bullied. So that's an important thing to be aware of as well. So somebody may have dementia and be doing repetitive behaviors or blocking with a wheelchair or whatever, and it's because they're confused, not because they're trying to control somebody or usurp their power, because they just don't know what they're doing cognitively. But for the person being blocked, it feels like they're being bullied, and we need to be aware of that dynamic. And then as far as what you mentioned about when you're having, you have somebody's doing repetitive questions or repetitive statements again and again and asking you, I remember I had a client, is this the train to Long Pine? No, we're in the nursing home. Is this the train to Long Pine? Well, after the 15th time, if you've been asked if it's the train to Long Pine, you do, as a staff member, lose your patience a little bit. And so you're worried about feeling like you're a bully because you have to intervene and have to, like, you can't listen to their story for the 15th time. What is people's reaction to that? How do we intervene in a way to minimize us being seen as a bully? What do you think?
Sometimes you can use physical touch and kind of do some redirection.
So physical touch and redirect. Any other ideas?
I think too, the thing that's striking me as well is that it's about kind of our own feelings as we're responding to that person. If we're responding out of anger, if we're responding out of frustration, that's very different than, okay, we know that this person has, said the same thing over and over again. We, as the receptive one of that, have to breathe and then go, okay, you know what, I understand. Thank you so much for telling me. I really need to go now. I'm really sorry, or whatever, and have it be a little, so that it doesn't come across as bullying, I guess. That it's about what our emotions are as we're speaking to that person versus kind of what is necessarily being said to us.
Yeah, so doing the best you can to control your own emotions around it. I think that's they're not coming, your frustration is not coming through to the client. And when you're frustrated, that can be hard, but I think it is about making sure that you're having a gentle tone, that you're including gentle touch if that's appropriate, and that you are having a calm facial expression as much as you can. And I mean, it's fine to interrupt people. You just have to do it in a way that's gentle and kind. So rather than, oh, I'm so sick of hearing that, rather than that type of interruption, which is, of course, anybody's going to feel like they're being bullied. If it's more like we just heard, thank you so much for telling me. I need to stop talking right now because I've got to work on this thing. Can you help me by X, Y, Z? And then redirection and distraction can be really, really helpful to give them, see if you can find something else for them to focus on. I need you to sort out these, this blue paper from this red paper or whatever. You probably have better ideas than I do, but sometimes, just using that gentle redirection can be helpful to manage your sanity. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about who is it that bullies people, older adults that bully each other. What are they all about? So here's some common characteristics of people who bully. They seek to control other people. That's an important part of what makes them feel good about themselves, is being in control. And we all like to be in control of our life. For people who bully, they like to be in control of their life, but everybody else, too, that's what makes them feel settled. And they find it very positively reinforcing to feel powerful, to feel in control, to make others feel threatened or fearful, or to cause conflict between other people. So if they can do things that make, like the two of you get into a fight, or you and you get into a fight, that's reinforcing as well. They also, and this is very key, they have difficulty tolerating individual differences. And that's something that's a for most people. We have a limit of what we can take, and if people are too far outside our expectations, we may have difficulty with that person. But somebody who is a bully, what they can tolerate is much narrower than your general population. So they get irritated a lot easier, a lot quicker with people's diversity of behavior. They also tend to lack empathy. So they have more difficulty seeing how other people feel, seeing other people's reactions, and just understanding other people's experiences. And they also have very few positive social relationships. So I'm standing up here telling you that bullies don't have any friends. And you're probably going, oh, well, of course not, they're bullies. But the thing here is we don't know which comes first. We don't know if it's, people bully and picking on other people, and so nobody's their friend, or if it's actually the opposite, that they don't have any friends, nobody really likes them, and so they just bully other people because why bother being nice? Nobody likes me anyway. So it's hard to know which way that goes. It may be a little bit of both. So the upshot here is that people who bully, they are reinforced by things that people aren't usually reinforced by, controlling others, making other people feel fearful. Among older adults, bullying also seems to be connected with loss. So loss of valued roles in society, loss of social identity, loss of a sense of belonging, loss of a real confidence in how they fit in to the world. So those losses contribute to a real strong sense of being out of control, which contributes to a strong sense of wanting to get back in control. And they may do that by domineering and picking on other people. So if you think about somebody who's newly moved into a retirement apartment or assisted living facility where they don't know anybody, they don't know how they fit in, they don't know, where am I in the pecking order. That's a hard place for some people to be. And for someone who's very motivated by being in control, especially in control of other people, that sort of feeling can bring out the desire to domineer and pick on other people. So when we talk about bullying and bullies among older adults, we tend to vilify the bully and, oh, he's such a bad person, and oh, they did this, they did that other thing, oh, what a terrible person. But it's important to think about what really may be going on there is someone who just feels very powerless, and they're doing all they can to try to get some sense of power, and that may be the only way that they know how. So we can have a little bit more empathy towards the bully, and that can help us when we intervene. So some of the negative behaviors may be just them trying to reach some sort of equilibrium and not knowing how else to do that. So part of our job is to help figure out, well, what are some more healthy ways that the person can feel in control that don't stomp on the rights of others. So here are some people in my study who tended to bully other people and how they talked about their feelings. So one person said, I have problems accepting their problems. That's one of the things that's the hardest to deal with. So this is a woman who is living in assisted living and saw all of her housemates, or whatever you want to call it, as just these walking buckets of problems. And she just couldn't deal with it. And it's like an example of that, difficulty with tolerating differences. These people are just too different from me. They're just too out there. I can't deal with them. And she would pick on them because of it. The next one, they go 2 generations back from me and I don't know what they're talking about. So again, these were facilities where there was younger people with disability and then older adults. And they had a very hard time seeing eye to eye. There was different values, different lifestyles, and all of that sort of thing. And for some people, they just couldn't tolerate that level of difference, and it would lead to lashing out at one another. For me, the hardest part has been living with people I've never associated with in my life. So again, people that were seen as very, very different, and I'm lashing out at them because of it. And it's almost like they're so different, they're not like me, it almost gave them license to be unkind. So this is one of my statistics slides that I'll explain a little bit here. So we were able to divide the sample up in a couple of different ways and did some standardized instruments. Assessing cognition, we use the MoCA, the Montreal Assessment of Cognition. It picks up early stage cognitive change. Depression, we used the geriatric depression scale, the short form. Self-esteem, we used Rosenberg's scale. And then we had a measure of lifetime trauma, which is a listing of 17 different types of trauma, going from least amount of trauma to most amount of trauma. And then least amount of trauma is like, a spell of illness where bed rest was required. Where most amount of trauma is seeing somebody murdered or being raped, those types of things. And we asked people, how many of these have you experienced in your life? So we didn't ask them to share what they'd experienced, but how many types of trauma they've experienced. And in the sample, everyone had been bullied. They came forward as, I've been bullied, or I've had problems with people who live here. And they came forward to talk about that. But there were people who, within that sample, bullied other people as well as being bullied. So we had two types of people. We had straight victims, for lack of other word, and then we had people who were victims but also bullied other people in return. So we were able to divide the sample and look at what are the differences in these two types of people. So we examined the differences in cognition, depression, self-esteem, and lifetime trauma. And when we ran the numbers, the only difference between them that was statistically significant was in lifetime trauma. And what we found is that the people who bullied experienced fewer episodes of lifetime trauma on average than people who didn't bully. It was quite a big difference, 5 episodes compared to over 8. So fewer episodes of lifetime trauma. I'll just call out one other difference. It wasn't statistically significant, but it has some clinical relevance, and that's the difference in cognitive impairment. So people who bullied tended to score, almost 25 on the MoCA, so almost 25 on average, whereas people who did not bully, it was more 21. So there was a 4-point difference in their score on the MoCA. So people who bully tend to have higher cognitive function, which makes sense, because in order to bully, you have to remember who it is you don't like, why you don't like them. You have to have a plan to be able to, get back at them, what you're going to gossip about, what you're going to tease them about, those sorts of things. So that was interesting. But my question to you, if I can get my slide to go forward, is around the finding on fewer incidents of lifetime trauma related to bullying. What do you think might be going on there? I was surprised by that result. We have a hand up in the back.
Yeah, my name is Gloria Horn. I'm up from Colorado Springs. I would say that the more trauma that you endure, the more empathetic or sympathetic you're going to be.
Yeah.
And less likely to fight back, maybe even realize where the bully and why the bully is bullying. Be more open to that.
Yeah, so the idea that the more trauma you've experienced, the more empathy you're going to have, the less likely you're going to be, you're going to bully. And maybe even going one step beyond that, the less likely you are to fight back, maybe because you know what it's like to experience trauma. Yeah, that's an idea. Any other ideas what might be going on here? Yes? Well, here comes the microphone. We want to make sure that everybody online can hear you. Yeah, they might think we're bullying if we don't talk loud enough for them to hear.
Well, my thought is that the person who bullies later in life, if they were ridiculed as children for seeing something as a traumatic event by a parent, they might not recognize that other events in their lives were traumatic and may be underreporting.
Yes, that's a very plausible explanation as well, because this is cross-sectional research. So we were just looking at people one point in time. And it could be that people who bully just underreport their episodes of trauma, or just don't remember it as well, or whatever. So it could be just something like that, an underreporting thing. Any other thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes.
This is just going back to your population. You said that these people were self-identified, came forward as being bullied.
Yeah, so we didn't ask people, hey, have you been bullied? But we asked, have you had difficulty living with other people? Are there things that people do that are problematic for you? And so that's how they were invited to come forward.
And then after they were invited, based on those questions, you identified them as bullying too, or how did that then occur?
How did we identify people who were bullying? The people at the assisted living facility identified, oh, this person's a bully, that person's a bully, and this person is a bully. So we didn't ask them to self-identify, hey, are you a bully? Because everybody would say no. So they were identified by people the people in the facility who knew them, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so this is something I'd like to look at further in my research. I mean, what is this connection between fewer episodes of lifetime trauma and a tendency to bully, and to try to figure out, is it just they underreport or whatever, or is it something more like less opportunity to develop empathy? And my theory is it's something to do with the less opportunity of developing empathy. And the reason I think that is because I know from my own experience that sometimes I've heard people, people will come to me and talk with me about some struggle they're having. And my initial response, and of course I don't share this with the person, but in my mind I might think like, oh, this person just doesn't have it all together. If that happened to me, I would cope with it this way, and I would be so much more on top of things. And, they're just, they don't really know what's, they're just not, they just don't got their act together. That's what I'm thinking in the back of my mind. I'm kind of judgmental about it. Again, not that I'm saying that or anything like that. But then lo and behold, a few months later, I'll have the exact same thing happen to me, and I'll respond in the same way that the person was telling me about. And then I understand, oh, now I get why they were acting that way. I understand why they couldn't respond in the way that they thought they should. It's because of this. And then I have so much more empathy for that, for what happened. And it's not until I go through something traumatic myself that I'm able to see that. So I can sort of see how having repeated difficulty in life would for some people help them to develop more feeling towards others. So anyway, it's just my thinking on it. Has not been studied, but I'd like to look more into that. So those are some ideas about people who bully. So next we'll talk about, well, who is it that gets bullied? So here's what we know about them. As you might surmise, they typically have trouble defending themselves. So they have a hard time standing up for themselves. They have a hard time walking away or doing any of those things that help to avoid bullying situations. And then, of course, some situations, no matter how strong you are, it's hard to walk away or avoid them. I'm thinking about the example we heard that happened in the military training. Well, it's hard to get away from that type of situation. But for older adults in assisted living and senior housing, a lot of what seems to be going on is just people not knowing how to avoid or prevent people from treating them that way. And I don't mean that they cause the bullying. It's not their fault. It's just they don't have the skills. And typically you'll see in an assisted living facility or in any other senior housing organization, there'll be a few bullies, one or two, maybe three. And not everybody in the building will be picked on. There'll be a handful of people who are picked on. So some are picked on and some aren't. And so what's the difference? So the ones who are picked on tend to have more difficulty defending themselves and don't have the skills to do so. And that points to an area for intervention, because if we can help them to build skills, that's one way to reduce bullying. They often experience a sense of real powerlessness because they don't know when's this going to happen. Is this going to be the day the person hits me with the hammer? We also see what we call passive targets and provocative targets. So passive targets tend to be highly emotional anyway and react to things more strongly than the average person. They have a hard time reading the social environment, understanding where other people are coming from, and we tend to see them as shy and insecure. They have a high level of anxiety. Now, if dementia is present, it's early stage dementia. And the other thing with passive targets is typically they're seen as somehow different from the overall population. So they're falling into that narrow window. They're falling outside that narrow window that the bully can cope with. So it's typically difference in race, ethnicity. It may be difference in spiritual beliefs. It may be differences in sexual orientation. Our LGBTQ folks get bullied a lot in senior living environments. So that's something important to be aware of. Also, we'll see difference being around physical functioning. So it may be the person who does have some memory loss. It may be the person who uses a wheelchair, the person who uses a walker, if the majority of the people there don't use those devices. It may be the one person who has a foreign accent, the one person who has hearing deficits. So anything that's somehow different from the overall environment. We were talking yesterday about a congregate meal setting that invited people who were experiencing homelessness to come in and have a meal. And they were really picked on because they're seen as very different from the rest of the population. So this point of difference is really key for passive targets. So provocative targets are different. They tend to be more annoying and irritating to others, just in the way they behave, and so bullies will pick on them because they're annoying. So the person who has the repetitive questions, the repetitive calling out, can be picked on. And again, it's not their fault, but just their behavior can draw irritation from bullies and be picked on. So they get into other space and those sorts of things. Sing loudly in the dining room and won't be quiet, and then people will call them names because of that. So if dementia is present, it tends to be more advanced than with the passive targets. So you've all heard the phrase, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's what was told to me when I was a child and I was bullied, and it's sort of minimized. And it's no big deal, just go on. It won't hurt you. It does hurt, and I think those of you who have been bullied know it does not feel good. That's the same for our older adults. It's a serious problem to experience those types of behaviors. So these are the types of reactions that people in my study talked about. They talked about feeling very angry, feeling very annoyed, frustrated, fearful, and not just a little fearful, really fearful to the point of having difficulty sleeping at night, constant anxiety, tension, and worry. Many of them talked about retaliating. So somebody would bully them, and then they would bully in return. But instead of feeling reinforced and powerful by that, they felt an intense sense of shame and self-loathing that they stooped to that level. There was a lot of self-isolation, people choosing to stay in their rooms to avoid bullies rather than going out and eating in the dining room or joining into activities because they didn't want to expose themselves to negative behavior. And then because there was a high level of mental health conditions in the facilities that I was working with, people also talked about how experiencing bullying exacerbated their mental health conditions, and it was harder to control symptoms of depression or bipolar disorder or anxiety. So these are some pretty significant results, especially when you think about anger. If you're constantly feeling angry, I mean, that's not a healthy way to feel. It can have other impacts on your emotional health and on your physical health. If you're constantly fearful and not sleeping, that's not conducive to physical health either. And many of us have heard all the negative ramifications of social isolation and loneliness. So it just all works together for significant negative outcomes for older adults who are bullied by their peers. So this is some of the quotes from my study of how people talked about what it felt like to experience these negative behaviors from their peers. One gentleman talked about it, he just felt burning mad. I mean, it was a physical sensation that he felt. Another person talked about you can't get away from that certain person. It's hard. She won't change. She does this to everybody every day. It just aggravates the crap out of me. And this is somebody talking about one of those more provocative targets, somebody who was quite annoying, very loud in the dining room, and he just couldn't stand it. And this is a gentleman who was very religious, very proper, and for him to use the word crap with a research team from the university really illustrates how frustrating this was for me, because he normally wouldn't use that type of language. I just have to dodge him because he will altercate me. I have to try and avoid being harangued. If he hits me and I fall, I'll break a bone. So this was from a woman who was bullied by a man who lived at the facility, and when she walked by, he would bump her with his elbow. And she was so afraid of falling and breaking her hip. She worried about it constantly. And nearly every day she'd be walking down the hall and he'd pop out around the corner, bump her. And can you imagine living like that every day? Am I going to fall and break my hip today? So very, very difficult for her. So this is another one of my statistics slides here, and this time the sample, we had people who, again, everybody in the sample came forward as having experienced negative behaviors from their peers, most which could be defined as bullying. And we also measured the level of distress they experienced from that. And some had maybe experienced the same behaviors, but their distress around it was low. And others had very high distress. So some very upset by it. Others were just able to sort of let it roll off their back and move on and engage in other things, and it wasn't such a big deal. So we wanted to see, well, what are the differences between those two types of people? Again, it's the same measures that we used before, the cognitive status, depression, self-esteem, and lifetime trauma. And this time when we ran the numbers, what came out as statistically significant was around depression and self-esteem. So the folks who were very distressed by exposure to bullying had more depressive symptoms, almost twice as much as, over twice as much as the low distress group. And then in self-esteem, they had much lower self-esteem. So highly distressed by bullying, it was associated with more depressive symptoms and lower self-esteem. So again, this is cross-sectional research, so we don't know which comes first. I don't know if it's your people who are bullied become depressed and their self-esteem drops, or if it's the opposite of that, where people who are depressed and have low self-esteem tend to be victimized by bullies. So I don't know which way it goes, and it could be a little bit of both. So it's just an interesting finding that I'd like to study more. So when we think about the impact of bullying and how it affects people's lives, what are some of the things that your people experience and struggle with that you'd like to share? Isolation. Tell me more about that.
Well, you're feeling ostracized by your peers and unwelcome at a dinner table or in an activity. They're going to retreat back to their apartments or back to their rooms.
Yeah, so the idea, if they're feeling unwelcome, and that's a key thing. People feel unwelcome, so they retreat from that when they're not welcome in the dining room, they're not welcome in group. They're going to avoid that by staying in their room. Yeah.
Which leads to depression and even more isolation because they're fearful to even try to engage again.
Yes, so like they've been burned once, they're not going to be burned again. So yeah, it creates sort of a cycle of self-isolating, getting depressed, getting fearful, not wanting to go out even more.
I'd like to hear a little bit about what I'm familiar with, because I'm not working in an institution situation, but I'm familiar with people getting positive reinforcement from peers for being bullies in the high school situation, because they appear to be people in control of a clique and a social group. And so bullying is reinforced at that age group. I imagine that that's not the case with seniors, that there isn't a bully that's in a nursing home that other people are all clustering around to tell him how great he is and giving him leadership position because he does that. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, now that's true. I haven't really seen that type of behavior in my work or heard about it in talking to colleagues. But at the same time, I could imagine it occurring, especially with provocative targets, somebody who is yelling out in the dining room or singing at the top of their lungs, and they're not a very good singer, and is doing things that irritate other people, and then somebody bullies that person and says, "Shut up, you stupid idiot, you're the dumbest I ever heard." I mean, I could imagine other people say, "Yeah, you tell them," because they're frustrated too. I haven't seen that happen, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear that it occurred. Has anybody else seen that kind of thing? Yes.
So I've actually seen it in some senior buildings where bullies are on like the resident council, and they tend to be popular, and they kind of take over certain rooms like the TV room, and then the people who they bully feel like, oh, if I see them there, I can't go in. Mm-hmm. So I have seen that in this population. Well, they're voted on the resident council, so people like them. They have a sense of power. So, yeah, I think it's probably a lot more common.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
She said that she sees it during the election process, bullying on the resident council.
Tell us more about that. Bullying around resident council elections.
Resident council elections. Well, I work in a PACE program, and we sort of have a participant council, and there was a whole campaign going on, like a presidential campaign happening. People made buttons up, and there were alliances, and who are you with, and who are you against? I mean, it was like an episode of West Wing. It really was ridiculous, and it got to the point where people weren't speaking to each other, and if somebody was in Kathy's camp and then they had a change of heart and they were in Joe's camp, there was a whole big, nobody liked that person because they'd switched sides, and it was a real absolute disaster.
It sounds really intense.
Yeah.
And a lot of hard feelings.
And we have some people we have some participants who will dominate. You were talking about the TV room, will dominate the room where the Wii bowling is, where I work, and they'll get to decide who gets to play that day. Mm-hmm. So some people don't even go in that room.
Yes, and I imagine having the amount of control that, you people who want to come and do the Wii bowling can't even do it because they don't let you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have seen it.
Oh, here's one over here. Oh, you've got your own microphone. Very good.
She brought it to me. She's a really good microphone warrior. One thing that we're seeing out on, I'm from Far East, Southeast, we're seeing more and more of the people who were formerly incarcerated who have basically aged out of their time in prison, and now they don't have a home, so they're moving into assisted living. And that has truly become a bully clique, like you would see in high school, like you're saying. Mm-hmm. We have one facility where the guy came in, he's significantly capable of everything else, but he doesn't have anywhere to go, so he's in this assisted living, and immediately became the patient advocate, and then took over the resident council. And then as soon as we had another resident that was there at resident council and made a complaint, and the guy said, "Come on, bro, you know better than that. Just keep that to yourself," like that, and just literally shamed him. And we had to actually discuss it afterwards and say, "Look, you can't do that. Resident council is a voice for everybody." But that's exactly what happens. It's just like in high school. They basically build this camaraderie of this prison gang, if you will, mm-hmm. and then they run the facility because everybody's afraid to say anything. But it's happened more and more as the incarcerated population migrates out into we would call normal population, but especially the assisted living type things.
Oh, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And is the rest of the population, are they aware that these are former inmates and they're afraid because of that?
Oh yeah, it's a campaign item. They literally like to brag about the fact that I'm a former convict. I have no problem with doing what I have to do. That's what they like to say. Mm-hmm. And it literally is like saying, "Don't mess with me. I'm a convict. Don't mess with me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do what I say or else. So yeah, really taking that power and control based on that history. There's some more in the back. Oh yeah, go ahead and then we'll pass it backward.
One of the things I notice a lot in response to your question is the helplessness that these people feel, mm-hmm. in addition to the isolation when they try to get some support from staff or from peers and it's just not working. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the more problematic behaviors that I see as an impact. Yes. When people are victimized.
Yes, hopelessness and helplessness. How are you going to defeat somebody who's controlling the Wii bowling, or a tough prison inmate who's controlling the resident council? If you're a person who doesn't have a lot of skills in self-preservation, that'd be very hard. And I think many of us know that hopelessness and helplessness lead to depression, which leads to other negative outcomes. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add to the comment earlier. It absolutely does happen in assisted living facilities. In fact, I was talking with a colleague this morning. I'm seeing it more and more, and it's almost like an episode of Mean Girls. It's really horrible. And what I suspect is happening or may happening, and I don't know if you have comments on this, I actually think we're going to see it increase in assisted living, in part because the care need of assisted living residents is rising. And from what you were talking about, the provocative targets, those seem to be, those type of residents that could fall into that type of category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where they're picked on because they're kind of annoying. So yeah, so just even though I haven't seen the dynamic in my work, it sounds like many of you have. So the idea is that people are egging on the bully, and that happens in high school, where people will latch on to the bully as a way to sort of ride on his or her coattails. And I mean, it makes sense that that type of dynamic would continue among older adults.
And Robin, I would add to that the folks that are working as caregivers in assisted living homes and nursing homes are not always armed or trained with skills that help them feel competent and confident in intervening in those situations.
Yes, that's a very good point. That I mean, it's hard enough to know how to intervene when you have dementia-related behaviors, but when you have these type of bullying behaviors, there's a very limited training on that. And I know caregivers and providers that I've talked to, they get really fearful around taking steps to intervene because they're so afraid of violating resident rights, and there's not clear legislation to guide us in, how do we balance resident rights? Of course, everybody has resident rights, but does that give you the right to call somebody, the N-word? No, it doesn't. And so that's a hard line for staff to draw, and they worry about that.
Something that is getting a lot of press and giving people notoriety and recognition is what's happening in the Trump administration now, with showing people that what's working is putting other people down and using bad language to marginalize people and giving people a right to call out other people as being different from themselves and therefore call them negative things. This is politically happening now, and it seems to me that what we're dealing with really is giving people a license to be more abusive, and at the same time we have to look at what we dealt with when we looked at The Lord of the Flies when we were younger and we read that book or we watched that movie, where they're talking about what is innate in our normal human nature. What is innate? It sounds like people telling us that this is institutions have hierarchies and all that, just like they did in the high school, means that there's something that's innate in human beings that is cruel or that is differentiating, or and that there's the people that are here and the people that are here and the people that are here. So isn't it better if we all figured out and worked on and talking about now in this group what tools are working best with helping people learn new techniques to get along better in an institution, whether it's a prison or an elderly person institution or a school.
Or the workplace. I think that's a good point. There's something about the human condition that these types of behaviors do surface, and I think there's something that brings that out, so it doesn't occur in a vacuum. But when you have an organization and there's people in it who just feel like they really need to have a sense of power and control, it can come out. Now, there was somebody back here who wanted to speak for the last couple of times who hasn't got a chance yet.
I've seen bullying impact trust that residents or participants or whoever have in staff.
Yes.
Because they will, maybe the bully is great friends with a staff member, or they go to the staff and say that this is happening, the staff corrects it, and then it typically doesn't happen right in front of staff. So then, they tend to start losing trust in staff, that nothing's being done, that it's just excused.
Yes, and that just sort of reinforces this, I'm not welcome here, people don't care about me. If the staff, you can't even trust the people caring for you. So, now, sir, did you have another thing you wanted to say? Did you have something else you wanted to say? You're good? Okay, good. Okay, did we have a break built in? I can't remember. Do people want a break? to get a drink, use the restroom and all that. Why don't we take a 10-minute break? People online probably would like a little bit of time too. So why don't we come back at 2:30 and we'll start. Again, I'm going to talk about bullying warning signs, and then we'll transition to talk about interventions.
Them all day if she'd let me. Her laugh, she hates, but I think it's so sexy. She's so beautiful, and I tell her every day. Oh, you know, I never ask you to change. If perfect's what you're searching for, then just stay the same. So don't even bother asking if you look okay. You know I'll say. You're amazing, just the way you are. And when you smile, the whole world stops and stares for a while. 'Cause girl, you're amazing, just the way you are. Yeah.
Only you in my life, the only thing that's right.
My first love, you're every breath that I take, you're every step I make. And I want to share all my love with you. No one else will do. And your eyes, they tell me how much you care. Oh, yes, you will always be my endless love. Two hearts that beat as one. Our lives have just begun. Forever, I'll hold you close in my arms. I can't resist your charms. And love, I my days. I wake up and I pinch myself. You're with me, not someone else. And I'm scared, yeah, I'm still scared. That is all a dream. 'Cause you still look perfect as days go by. Even the worst ones, you make me smile. I'd stop the world if it gave us time. 'Cause when you love someone, you open up your heart. When you love someone, you make room. If you love someone and you're not afraid to lose them, you probably never loved someone like I do. You probably never loved someone like I do. When you say you love the way I make you feel, everything becomes so real. Don't be scared, no, don't be scared. 'Cause you're all I need. And you still look perfect as days go by. Even the worst ones, you make me smile. I'd stop the world if it gave us time. 'Cause when you love someone, you open up your heart. When you love someone, you make room. If you love someone and you're not afraid to lose them, you probably never loved someone like I do. You probably never loved someone like I do. All my life, I thought it'd be hard to find the one till I found you. And I find it bittersweet. 'Cause you gave me something to lose. But when you love someone, you open up your heart. When you love someone, you make room. If you love someone and you're not afraid to lose them, you probably never loved someone like I do. You probably never loved someone like I do. You probably never loved someone like I do.
Okay, I have that it's 2:30, so I'm going to go ahead and get started again. I'll wait for everyone to get comfortable. And hopefully our online people have joined back in as well. You know, I don't know. I've not worked in senior centers. Is anyone here from senior center?
Or, a living facility, like a nursing home.
I know nursing homes have done that when it's actual physical aggression. I don't, at least in my history, that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. I haven't heard of facilities calling about verbal abuse, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It looks like some people know. Well, let's get our microphone. So I don't know if everyone heard the question. It was around when these types of incidents occur, can the police be notified? And
can they do it? Do they have jurisdiction?
yeah, it's a very good question. So let's hear from the audience.
The police will certainly come out and do at least a preliminary gather of information. But if anybody has even a hint of dementia, they can't do anything. If dementia's on anybody's record, at least that's been my experience. I mean, I've had a husband shove a wife, and
so.
I'm Chuck Charkowski, detective with the Colorado Springs Police Department, Crimes Against
What a
At-Risk
wonderful
Adults.
person to answer that question.
Yeah, yes, we do respond. We get these all the time. My partner Steve and I go to senior housing and do presentations and answer these kind of complaints. But yes, you know, it has to meet the definition of the statute for harassment, you know, repeated. And also, the fact that a person has dementia does not automatically mean we won't prosecute, because as everybody knows, dementia is a continuum, and somebody can have dementia and still know right from wrong.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And there's sort of a fine line, because some of these behaviors are antagonistic, they're problematic, but they're not necessarily harassment or breaking the law in any way. And so it's just, some people are just kind of rude in their behavior and difficult to deal with. So it's a fine line. So, but I'm glad to know that that's a resource that people can call and have you come out, and in the more severe cases to have some help. Okay. Was there somebody else who wanted to say something? You did, yes. Where's our microphone? Here it comes.
So in my job as registered nurse, I was court appointed to be a co-guardian for a woman who was in memory care in Colorado Springs. So I'm well aware of the police coming out on a regular basis for the woman who was a physical bully, and she would scratch and bite at the other residents. And so within that facility, they had the ability to put her in a place where she wasn't around as many people, and she was then isolated herself. But she was a physical bully, and that there's not too much they could do because she was hurting other residents, and they had to do that.
Yeah, so you can't, you know, have people being scratched and bit. That's not what we want. Yes, there's one in the back.
I was just going to say, I worked assisted living in Arizona. Here I work in independent living. But in assisted living, with the bullying, a lot of times there they did consider staff responsible, and you wanted to bring in adult protective services. And oftentimes staff was questioned because, of course, if someone has dementia, staff might be considered responsible for their actions and making sure the residents are safe.
That's a really good thing to be talking about, because in some settings there are expectations that residents aren't held accountable for their behavior, and the person accountable is the staff. That you need to have behavioral plans in place, you need to have the environment set up to minimize behavior, and if these negative things happen, it's the staff's fault. And I mean, there is a point to that, and we need to do an assessment when these behaviors are happening, and trying to get to, you know, why is the person doing what they're doing, and are there things that we can try to reduce these behaviors? So when we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction and like, oh, you're a bully, you're out of here. I mean, maybe there's actually things that we can change that can help the situation. We were just having a talk during the break about how sometimes I had mentioned that bullying is sometimes related to loss, and sometimes it can be people that are moving into our settings and they've had loss after loss after loss, death of a spouse, death of a child, death of a caregiver, and some people react to that with empathy, and some people react by being bitter and wanting to make everybody else miserable, and so they're picking on everybody. You're going to be as miserable as I feel, and I mean, we want to help that person to adjust and process the grief and loss, and help them to overcome that, rather than like, oh, you just can't be in our facility, you're too mean. But looking at what is the underlying problem, and are there things that we can do to help them. And if we've tried again and again and again, and the person is still scratching and biting and making everyone else miserable, well, then we're more in a place that maybe we do need to think about another living environment. So your point is well taken. So I want to talk a little bit about how do we know if bullying is occurring. And for the most part, we're going to know because we're going to see it, or people are going to come and they're going to complain, or they're going to call us and tell us about it. But sometimes we're working one-on-one with a person and maybe we don't see the actual living environment in their day-to-day life. So here's some markers or some things that can raise red flags that the person you're working with may be bullied in the environment where they're living, or where they're going for their meals or their activities. And so somebody who self-isolates, that's one of the markers. And I don't mean that everyone that self-isolates is being bullied, but that's one thing that we might be thinking about. Someone who avoids specific areas of the building or specific activities, especially activities that they've always enjoyed. And now they're like, oh, I can't go to bingo, and bingo's always been their favorite thing. Or, I can't go to the church services because of XYZ, and that's something they've always gone to. That can be a marker. Oh, I can't go in the dining room. Oh, I can't go in there. That kind of talk is a red flag. Also, someone who takes really crazy routes, long, drawn-out ways to get to certain parts of the building is a marker as well. I had one of my people in the research study could get to the activity room by just going down the hallway and making a left turn. But instead of doing that, he would go out the back entrance, through the parking lot, down the alley, around the dumpsters, through the service entrance. This craziest route you can possibly imagine. And he had mobility impairment. And what was going on there is he was trying to avoid passing by somebody who tended to pick on him. So that's another hallmark. And then they tend to make vague complaints, things like they don't like me, they won't let me, oh, I can't do that. It's usually not specific complaints about a specific person, because people who are bullied, they fear retaliation. And they're afraid if they report the bully, that the bully is just going to escalate. So you'll hear these vague types of complaints. And then in the context of depressed mood as well. So, and again, I don't mean that everyone who's depressed is being bullied, but these sorts of markers can be warning signs that may be going on, and you can ask questions about how are people treating you at the assisted living center, or how are things going at the senior centers? Is there anyone who's making it uncomfortable for you? So they can just be ideas to maybe explore further with the person. Now, how do you know if somebody is a bully? That's another one that comes up, because typically what happens is bullies do their behavior when staff isn't around, or when administrators or people in authority are coming around, are not around. So how do you know? And typically, people who bully other residents or other peers, they also intimidate staff and bully staff, especially staff who are seen as more vulnerable. So they're not picking on people in charge, but they're picking on the new person in housekeeping who's a new immigrant from another country and who's still working on English language skills. So they'll pick on that person. They'll pick on the new kitchen employee who, is seen in a certain type of way. So that's one hallmark. They'll also tell others what to do in a very bossy style. And some of you have talked about that, the person who's in charge of resident council and who's telling people, oh, no, you can't say that in this meeting. You know better than that. And no, you can't play bowling today. That type of person, obviously. They also tend to, they'll come to you and they'll criticize other people with a complete lack of empathy as they're talking about it. So they'll complain about those people who are hard of hearing and they just don't listen. That type of thing, just no empathy. And they make repeated complaints about other people. And they'll even come up to you and tell you in a very outraged, aggressive style about other people bullying them. And that is a classic pattern, because what happens, if you are so strong that you can come up and say, hey, they're picking on me, what are you going to do? I want you to fix it right now. Somebody who can do that kind of thing is not going to be, they're not going to be picked on because they're too strong. So typically what happens is that they're picking on other people. Other tenants are trying to say, no, you can't do that. You can't talk to people like that. So they're getting some pushback about their behavior, and they don't like it, and they perceive that as a bullying, and then they'll complain about those people. So that's the bullying isn't isolated just for residents. They'll also pick on staff and do these types of behaviors as well. So that's just some things to keep in mind. So this is the part in the presentation, the last hour and 15 minutes, where I want to talk about interventions and some of the things that are being done across the country to try to address these behaviors. And remember that there's not a lot of research being done in this area. So these are not clinically tested interventions. There's not been randomized controlled trials or anything like that. We're not at that stage yet. But these are interventions that my colleagues, providers in the field, have found promising, because we need to do something while we wait for the research to be done. And so here's the things that seem to be working. So I want to remind everybody about Maslow's hierarchy, which you may have studied if you ever took the beginning psychology class. And what Maslow says is that we all have human needs. They're all very similar. And we need to address lower level needs before we can really address higher level needs. So down at the bottom, we have our physiological needs. That's, our need for food, for water, for air, those sorts of things. Next is the safety needs, where we need a safe environment, where we can rest, have a roof over our head, and those sorts of things. Next is love and belonging, so feeling that we're part of a group, that people like us. Esteem is the next one, and the highest is self-actualization. So I use this in teaching my students in social work about, how do you help. We typically in social work, we have clients who have multiple problems. It's not just one thing they're struggling with. There's several different things. And how do you structure your intervention? So if you have somebody who is coming to you, they don't know where their next meal is coming from. They don't have access to clean water. They don't have a roof over their head. And those sorts of things, those are the primary areas of struggle. And then they have low self-esteem and don't have a support group and all those sorts of things. Well, the way to help that person is not like, oh, you don't have food and water. I'd like you to join my support group for helping people to cope with not having food and water. I think that will really help you. It'll really address your love and belonging and your esteem needs. Well, that's not going to do any good. We first have to meet the needs of, oh, look at that, my physiological needs are met. For those online, I couldn't find any water earlier, and someone just delivered me some water. So I'm very good. So now we can address my safety. Now, so anyway, what I'm saying is that my students first have to help the clients get access to food and water before it makes sense to move up and work on love and belonging. And it's the same sort of thing in working around issues of bullying. So let's think about people who bully and what we've been talking about for the last hour or so. Where would they fall on terms of what need are they trying to meet in terms of their behavior of controlling other people? Esteem. Say again?
Safety.
Safety. I've heard of safety. I've heard esteem.
Love and belonging.
Love and belonging. Yeah, it's those. It's a little bit higher level. They're probably working on love and belonging and esteem, to some extent maybe safety, but they're trying to fit in. They're trying to feel good about themselves, and the way they're doing that is by controlling and belittling others. And we can think about that in designing an intervention. So what are some other ways that they can achieve love and belonging? What are there some other ways we can bolster their self-esteem so they don't have to resort to bullying? So that's something to think about. Now let's think about people who are bullied. Where do they fall on this hierarchy? What sort of needs do they have? Yeah, they're a little bit lower on safety because they feel very insecure, very powerless, very frightened. I mean, to some extent, love and belonging as well. But our interventions for them need to be designed around how can we help them create a safe environment? How can we help them to have a little bit more power in these situations? So whatever type of behavior is occurring, if we can think about what is the underlying need here, that can help us design our own interventions. So I like to think about intervention for bullying as three tiers. And typically, we just think about one tier. We just think about that bully who's such a problem, and if we could just fix him or her, all would be well. And it's really a lot more than that. We also have to look at the organization and what is it that's going on in the organizational culture that allows this behavior to occur, and what can we do to change the culture to minimize the likelihood that bullying will occur. So if you think about how bullying is being addressed in the school system with kids, I mean, they're looking at the whole organization and trying to change this culture of the school, as well as trying to help the bullies and the victims. So we need to do the same thing among older adults. So what do we need to do differently in assisted living, in senior centers, in congregate meal settings, in nursing homes that changes the culture? And then, of course, how can we help the bully achieve a sense of control in some other ways? And then how can we help the victim and the target to maybe have a little bit more power to prevent bullying from happening? So I want to talk about organizational level intervention first. And the idea there, whatever we do, is to try to create a more caring community where negative behaviors, like some of you have shared, aren't tolerated. So promoting more caring, promoting more empathy, and remembering that empathy is really the best antidote to bullying. And this is not easy to do. It's not like you just snap your fingers and you have a caring environment. It takes work, and there's a whole process involved. So I'm going to share with you 4 interventions that my colleagues across the country are doing to try to change culture of their organizations a little bit to reduce the likelihood that bullying will occur. So I want to talk about civility training, upstander training, resident recognition programs, and pro-social activities. And one of the reasons I selected these 4 to showcase is that they're easy to implement. I don't mean short, but they're easy. They're not hard. You don't need to have 5 PhDs to be able to implement these. They're more lay individuals with just training in how to do the intervention can do it. It doesn't require you to be a psychologist or anything like that. So civility training, and Diana Benson, my colleague, is doing this. She is the resident services coordinator for like a continuing care retirement community in Wisconsin, I believe. And what this intervention is about is helping people to get back to the roots of civility. She's trying to remember the olden days when manners and politeness and all of that was more common. We were hearing about our current political culture, that it's almost common and accepted that we pick on one another. So trying to get back to an earlier time that often resonates with our older population who remembers manners and politeness and all of that. And reminding them of those types of behaviors and talking with them about what type of community do you want to live in, and what makes you comfortable, and what does it mean to you to be in a civil environment. So the way she sets the stage for that type of discussion is very unique, and it's part of what makes the intervention. And one of the things I'll tell you is that people who bully other people, I mean, they don't come forward and say, oh, I'm a bully. I pick on people all the time. Can you please help me? I mean, nobody says that. I mean, not that I've ever heard. Maybe you have. But usually people who are bullies, that's flags there. I thought there was a person there. People who bully, I was trying to include them. People who bully, usually they aren't even aware that they are doing that. So if you try to do an intervention that's designed to help the bullies learn better behaviors, and you plan this big thing, and everybody comes except the bullies. I mean, that's part of the challenge. The people who really need to be there don't come. So Diana has a way of subverting that and getting everyone to come to her intervention. And so what she does is she has these posters printed up that feature the 9 tenets of civility. So she has a poster that says pay attention, and some that say listen, some that say be inclusive, and so on. And about 8 weeks out before the event, she posts the pay attention poster all over the facility, but she doesn't say anything about it. So these posters just magically appear with no explanation, and people go, oh, what's that? And they all come to her office and, hey, what's these signs about pay attention? And she just says, oh, you'll see. And then the next week she changes it out and she puts out the listening one. And then people are like, oh, what's this? What's this? And it just generates a lot of hype. And she doesn't share any information other than to say, on May 8th, you'll find out. Oh, on May 8th, you'll find out. And so people get really excited. They get really hyped up over this 8-week period where she's putting up these different posters. And lo and behold, when it's time for the event, everybody comes because they want to figure out what it's all about. And she starts it out with this discussion about civil society and what does it mean to have a civil society, and how do we treat each other if we're being civil? Do we have that kind of society in our own community? And what are some of the things that are happening here that we'd like to change? What are some of the things we want to have happen here that will make this more a civil society? So they have a really good discussion about how to improve the civility of their community and the types of things that are really important to the residents. And then it ends with everybody signing an agreement. We agree that we are going to work together to create a more civil community here at XYZ living community. And then it spells out what's important to them and what they're agreeing to, and then everybody signs it, and it's their big agreement to work towards civility. But it doesn't end there. There's an ongoing discussion about how things are going. So it's comprised of regular meetings about how it feels to live in the community and how things are going in terms of civility. And so they're regularly talking about problems, regularly talking about what do we need to do about this, and working as a group. And the meetings aren't negative based, so it's not people coming to the meeting and saying, well, you know, Mr. Jones did X, Y, Z this week, and Mrs. Smith did A, B, C, oh, she's so terrible. It's not that kind of discussion. It's more like, what challenges towards civility have we had this week? What has been difficult to implement this week? What have we been having trouble with? So it's more like, what are the barriers to being civil, rather than what are all the incidents of incivility? Does the difference make sense? So that approach has been very helpful in her community. Everybody signing on to sort of a pact to be civil and continuing to work on how can we incorporate it this week? What's our challenges this week? What do we need to do about it? And it's been really helpful. And from those meetings, the residents themselves have branched out to do even more civil things. So one of the things they did is to implement a neighborhood watch program, for a lack of better word. There's probably a better word for it that you'll recognize as soon as I start talking about it. But people have things that they hang on their door before they go to bed. And then after you get up in the morning, you take that back in, and it's a sign to everyone that all is well, you're up and about. But there's people that go around like at 10 a.m. in the morning, and if anyone still has their sign on the door, it's sort of a signal that, oh, something might not be right. They may not have been able to get out of bed, they may have fallen, they may be sick, and so then there's a wellness check on that person. And so the residents themselves are doing that, and it came out of this civility work. And so that's just prompted more sense of community among them. The other thing they did is they developed like a bartering exchange system. So, for example, people can sign up and say that you're a really good seamstress. Well, person will agree to like, well, I'll hem your pants, or I'll sew in a button for you, or repair your clothes in exchange for a ride to the doctor, or something like that. So they're bartering services based on their skills. So that's something that's grown out of that as well. So again, it's generating that sense of community. So she's had a lot of success with this intervention. So are there questions or comments about that type of thing? It wasn't something that brought about change overnight, but over time there was a subtle change in the culture of the community, and there was more civility, more caring, and less of those negative picking on one another behaviors. Okay, there's no questions or comments? Yes, go ahead.
Isn't it true that this kind of intervention would work at a place where people don't come from a background where they're struggling to survive and living at low socioeconomic conditions before they arrive at the facility? In other words, the people that already come from a more civil society and lifestyle are going to have desire to adapt to that more readily than somebody who comes from a struggling environment.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that we don't know because this has not been tested in multiple different types of organizations. Diana has good luck with it in her continuing care community, which from my understanding is fairly it's very different from where I did my research studies, where there's not a high level of mental health problems, not a high level of substance abuse, and in general overall struggle. So that's something to keep in mind. It may not work as well in other types of settings, but it's something worth trying. And it may be that you try it out and it needs to be modified to fit your population. But I just wanted to share that this is something that she has found to have good success. And of course, the people aren't don't have a high level of cognitive impairment because they can participate in these discussions. So I think that's a key as well. It would be hard to do this in a nursing home where people can't remember what it is they're supposed to do to be civil. Now, upstander training is very different, and it's built on the idea that bullying doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's not just the bully and the victim. There's typically other people there who witness it, and those other people can step in and help intervene. And this has worked quite well in the school systems where you're training other students to intervene, and they found out that if bullying is happening and somebody steps in, like within 10 seconds, the bullying stops. So it's built on that idea of training residents. How do you respond? What can you do if you see bullying going on in the vicinity? And she calls it upstander training as opposed to bystander training because, it's sort of uses the slogan, stand up against bullying or negative behavior. And so it's around teaching and education that if we don't intervene when we see it, we're just giving permission for the bullying to continue. And it involves training them, what is bullying, what's the definition of it, the cycle of bullying, how does it happen, which I'm going to show you next. They do some role playing to help people get a feel for what does it feel like to be bullied, what does it look like when somebody's being bullied, and then she does some training around how can you intervene. And it's fairly simple interventions. They're not sitting down with people and doing psychotherapy or anything like that. It's usually, like some of you shared, redirection and distraction. So when seeing two people kind of getting into it or somebody picking on another person, the intervention would just be going on. Hey, you two, this looks pretty tense. How about you go and have a walk with me? Or, hey, I was just going to go out and get a cup of coffee. Why don't you join me? So just those types of interventions that are distraction and redirection of the two parties within, an upbeat, non-accusatory style. And then they practice that through role play. So with the cycle of bullying, it's here. And I don't know if this has a pointer. It probably does. I'm just probably not working it right. But anyway, I don't know if you can see this from your seats, but it starts out with the bully targeting the victim. And then the next one is that people then may join in and partner with the bully to escalate the bullying. The victim and bystanders don't intervene or do anything to change that. So that empowers the bully to continue. If still no intervention occurs, the bully will continue to target, and it keeps going around and around. So within this cycle, there's actually 2 points where somebody can step in and break the cycle through intervention. So she teaches them that and empowers them that you have a place to help prevent this occur, and then gives them the tools to do that. So she's had good success with that as well. And again, simple redirection and intervention, because the idea is that it needs to be a safe intervention. So questions, comments about that type of intervention, training people to intervene. You could do this with staff too. Okay, so resident recognition programs is another one. And many interventions that we talk about are addressed at reducing bullying, which is fine and great. But resident recognition programs is the opposite. It's increasing positive behavior. So the idea is if you're doing interventions to decrease negative behaviors and you're also doing one to increase positive behavior, you're going to have even more impact on behavior change. So resident recognition is aimed at encouraging and increasing the number of positive behaviors occurring in the organization. And it begins with talking with residents, consumers, tenants, whatever they're called in the organization, about what are the things that we want to see happening here. How do we want to see people treat one another? What do we think is worthy of recognition? So some examples of what her residents have identified as important is caring behaviors, welcoming behaviors, upstanding behaviors, encouraging one another, helping one another, supporting one another. And of course, these are all, defined with examples to make it understandable for people. But the idea is then there's a team of like a caring committee or a caring squad or whatever. And what their job is to go around the facility quite often and observe and identify when these caring, nice, positive behaviors occur, and when they witness them, and then to take note of it. So if somebody welcomes a new resident to the building and takes them, shows them where the dining room is, and introduces them to people, that might be something that they take note of. If somebody says somebody's having a bad day and is grumbling, and somebody says in a very kind way, well, good morning, it's nice to see you, rather than, grumbling at them themselves, they would take note of that. So the idea is taking note and keeping track of nice behaviors that they observe. And then there's a ceremony every month to pass out the awards, the niceness awards. So anyone who was caught in the act of being kind is rewarded for that behavior, whether it's through a little certificate or a pin or a sticker or whatever. The idea is it's public recognition for kind behavior. And these ceremonies have been very popular. Everybody comes, even the bullies. And I don't know what's so attractive about it. There's something fun about it, I guess. And just they're making a fuss over being people who have been nice and drawing attention to that behavior. So they're very feel-good ceremonies. And one of the things that's nice about it is because the people who bully tend to be there as well, they get a real range of other ways of behaving, other ways of being recognized. So there's like this hidden teaching that occurs as well, and that's been really positive. So any questions or comments about that one? Yes, there's one here.
So with this training, I was wondering, do you see the people that are getting recognized as a target for bullying? Has that increased? Have you seen anything like that?
In talking with Eleanor about it in her writings, she, that could happen, but as far as I know, it hasn't. So, and the key is the caring squad really has to be vigilant in monitoring and observing these things, because there could be hurt feelings. Well, I was really nice yesterday, but nobody noticed that I didn't get an award. There can be those types of problems. So there has to be a good system in place so that people don't get unrecognized. Yes.
Yeah, kind of going along with that, I was wondering if they've seen bullies take over the caring squad like they do some of the other kind of leadership teams and facilities.
That hasn't happened either, and I think that the way it's done is not self-volunteer for the caring squad. It's people nominated for the caring squad and bullies not being nominated. And that sounds kind of mean, but that's part of what makes it work. Yes?
I just wanted to share that one of the nursing homes that I used to visit, by the name of Jewel Care Center, the residents came up with the idea of, they called it Jewels of Love, where they placed a box in the dining room, and any resident at any time could make a comment, a good comment about another resident and how they appreciated having been treated. And I encouraged them to say specifically what behavior they were recognizing so that people would say, oh, I really appreciate that you always say hello to me, or that you always have a smile, so that people know what kinds of things they're doing right.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example and sort of an outtake of a similar idea behind the resident recognition program, where anyone, like everybody, is on the caring squad and can insert things into that box. That's the jewel of love, and that's a wonderful idea. And those can be shared with people. And if somebody puts in a jewel of hate, well, you can just put that one in the goblet of fire and get rid of it. And my Harry Potter references. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Any other comments or questions?
Can you see the resident recognition programs creating targets for bullies?
That hasn't happened, according to Eleanor's writing and my talk with her about it. But anything could happen. So that's something that would need to be monitored. Like if a bully got, you got that award. I mean, I could see that happen. I haven't heard about it happening, but that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. So. But, that's not the intent, to create targets for bullying. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one here. So this one is pro-social activities. And it's based on the idea that people who are busy, doing good, and having fun have less time for bullying. So in part, we see bullying occur in situations where people have time to do that. In the workplace, people who bully, it's like, oh yeah, you just need to be given more work to do. But so this idea, and I don't know if you've seen welcoming committees in assisted living or senior housing. So what a welcoming committee is, it's like a little group of typically older women who sit in the front lobby, and everyone who passes, they have something to say about them. They're whispering about their clothes and their hair and this, that, and the other thing, making loud, audible comments that are very negative and hurtful. So pro-social activities is very useful intervention for those types of folks who tend to use their time negatively. We can take that and turn it around and have them use it positively. But have you seen welcoming committees? You have those in your, and I mean that sarcastically. You've seen that? Yeah. So think about those folks, and this is a nice intervention for them that puts their energy to good use. There is a research base for this intervention, and it's associated with increased self-esteem and reduced symptoms of depression. So if you remember that slide I showed quite far back, one of my research ones, where we divided the sample into people very distressed by bullying and those who weren't so distressed, and the difference was high distress was more depression and less self-esteem. So this intervention specifically addresses that. So it's something that people who are bullied can enjoy and participate in as well. And so what it is involves people in some sort of community engagement project that's designed to help others either inside or outside the community. And typically, I mean, you're doing several of these where they're helping in all kinds of different areas, so people are very engaged in helping others, and it needs to be tied to something that's of interest to them. But the things that Eleanor's people have done, just for example, they've been involved in knitting hats for premature babies at the hospital and been really engaged in that. They've been involved raising money for charity through bake sales or through knitting pot holders or whatever type of thing. Making phone calls, stuffing envelopes for political campaigns. So those are just some very basic examples, but there's a range of different things that could be done to keep people busy doing good. So that's the final one I wanted to share. That's an organizational level intervention designed to create more caring and civil environments. So any questions on that one? Pro-social activities. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about interventions for people who bully. Now, these aren't like specific, do A, do B. I mean, we don't have those types of interventions. And they do need to be tailored for the specific person. So these are some general ideas about the kinds of things that you want to do. One of them is consistently setting limits. The person who bullies needs to hear again and again from everybody that you may not do that. That's not allowed here. I was talking with somebody during the break that one of the key things that needs to be in place is policies and procedures about what's expected. How do we expect people who live in this organization or who use this organization, how do we expect them to behave? What are the things that are absolutely not tolerated? And having it spelled out in the policies and procedures, including what the consequences are. Because in some cases, these situations get so bad that and the person just is not able to change their behavior, and you have to say, I'm sorry, you can no longer come back to our senior center. You're causing too much pain and suffering for other people. And sometimes it gets to the place where you have to do evictions, but it has to be clearly spelled out in policies and procedures what the expectations are and what the steps you're going to take. And my recommendations are to involve the residents, involve the tenants, involve the consumers in determining what are the behaviors that we just cannot tolerate. So it's really clear. So in setting limits, you're wanting to fall back on what your policies and procedures are. In our policies and procedures, we don't allow people to use vulgar language in the dining room. If you continue to use vulgar language in the dining room, you're not going to be able to have your meals here. And everybody has to give the same message. Because what happens if there's one or two people who don't give the same message, well, that's when the person's going to do all their vulgar behavior or whatever they're happening. At the same time, if you think about what we've learned about so far is that sometimes bullying seems to stem from just intense feelings of loss and feeling out of control. It also seems to stem from just that limited tolerance for difference and struggling with people who are very different from them. And the feelings of the bully are real feelings. They're grieving, they're feeling out of control, they're very uncomfortable being with all these different people. That's a real feeling that we're not going to change. We can't just say, feel better about people, like more people. That's not going to happen. So they need to have an outlet to vent their frustrations. And that may not be with you, but it may be that part of your intervention can be helping them find somebody within the organization that they can talk with about how hard it is to live with people with mental illness or live with people from such and such faith or such and such cultural group. They have to have an outlet for that. We can't just say, oh, you have to love everybody. Oh, no, you've got to like that group. You know, we're all about diversity now. I mean, some people just aren't ready for that. So I myself have had good success with making agreements with people. When, you know, Mr. Jones, I know it's really hard for you to live with people from that cultural group. I know that you were in World War II and you were at war with that cultural group, and I know you continue to have hard feelings. It continues to be difficult for you, but I can't have you yelling out those obscenities in the dining room. How about if you come and see me 3 times a week? I'll spend 15 minutes with you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can talk with me about how difficult it is, and I will listen to you. But in order, you know, for me to do that, you have to promise you're not going to say those things in the dining room. And then the person comes and talks with me and like, oh, I hate such and such, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, I don't agree with them or do anything like that. I just said, well, you know, that sounds like it's really hard to live in this environment when you feel like that. Oh, yeah, it is. Let me tell you, blah, blah, blah. You know, and I'm just validating and just listening. And over time, you know, the person feels heard, they feel understood, and they actually start to feel a little bit more positive toward the group that they didn't like. And that has been a really useful approach. And of course, it's not fun listening to somebody rag on whoever group, because that's not what I'm all about. But I do recognize the need for the person to have an outlet to express those feelings and have them heard and not judged. So other things that we need to think about in intervening with people who bully, and this is really key, are there other ways that they can feel that they're in control, that don't violate the rights of others? Are there things that we can have them involved in that increase their sense of being in control, that increase their sense of power, but don't hurt other people? So in some situations, we can find things for them to do that give them that sense of control. But there's a caveat here. Some of you have asked, well, how do you prevent them from bullying and, you know, when you're doing pro-social events or whatever? This can backfire if we put somebody in charge of resident council. Then they are, you know, use resident council as a venue to continue their bullying. So you'd have to be it has to be well thought out. You can't give them control over too much of a big thing. Has to be relatively small, and you have to monitor how that goes. But it could be in charge of handing out bingo chips. It could be being in charge of taking attendance, or something relatively benign, but still is an important role. And you're reinforcing, oh, it would be so helpful to me if you could do this. Oh, you're doing such a great job. So those kinds of things can help. Again, being careful that we're not giving too much power. Sometimes it's about helping them learn to communicate a little bit better, helping them to develop empathy. Now that's an intervention that needs more of a professional to do. So in certain situations, there may be a mental health professional or an educator in the community that can come in and do empathy training that's specifically designed to build empathy, and it needs to be offered for everybody, not just the bullies. So that's an intervention as well. And then helping them to expand their social network. Because if people, you think about bullies not having very many friends, there's not much incentive to be nice. So helping them to make friends with a couple of people can help. Again, not easy interventions, not done overnight, but those are some steps that can be taken. For people who are bullied, you know, the victims of bullying, they're feeling pretty low. So whatever we can do to bolster their self-worth, bolster their dignity, increase their self-esteem is helpful. If there's underlying depression, making sure that it's treated. And then remembering that people are bullied because they don't have the skills to prevent it from happening. So helping them build skills. What can we do to help them learn to a little bit more stand up for their rights, manage the feelings of anger that are involved, helping them communicate using I statements, how to get themselves out of situations. And I think something to keep in mind with this is many of these people may have been victimized all their life, been stomped on, picked on, for the past 80 years. So we're not going to overnight turn them into some big advocate. So even if we can get them to the point where they feel comfortable coming to administration and saying, hey, this is happening to me, can you help me? I mean, that is a big step to increase their feelings of self-worth, dignity, and control, even if all they can do is come and report it. So that's a big win in terms of intervention for them. So those are the interventions that I wanted to share, and I want to spend the last half hour just talking about the situations that you're struggling with and brainstorming and using some of these ideas to, one, understand what might be going on with the bullying and to think about what we might be able to do. And I don't mean that I'm going to solve your problems. We can't do that in a half an hour, but we can talk about and get some ideas from each other about what can happen. So is there somebody who would like to share something that they'd really like to talk about with the group? Shall we talk about what you're experiencing in your living situation?
I can tell you what I did do besides the...
Yeah, tell us about the problem again.
Sorry. So the problem was, and I'll go into more, well, I got to preserve the person who so I can't say, I'm trying to think in my mind how I can tell you without...
Yeah, we want to maintain confidentiality and all that.
All right, so the bullying was a situation that happened, and it would happen in front of my peers. Mm-hmm. So that it's not just me who's on this leadership team. Even my husband's on the leadership team, and he manages the laundry room, which most of the bullying happens at. So she would just say inappropriate things, not just to me, but it was other residents. There was one day I was going up to the laundry room, and I heard her arguing with a neighbor, and she had her cane and physically pointing it in the man's face. And she was saying, the problem with this building is we've got to get all the liberals out. And she was just in a tirade. And I mean, he kept backing up, and finally the man just shut his door. Mm-hmm. And that day I was helping someone, and we were using the laundry room, and I went back up to the woman's place, and she rode the elevator with me, and she wanted to discuss the problems with the liberals in the building. And I wasn't going to get into a discussion, and I was trying to ramp down her anger because I could see it. She wasn't pointing the cane in my face at that time, but there were incidences like that with other people. So it wasn't just me, and it was bullying, and I could see it plainly. So I would take that to because there's an HOA involved, and so I would take that to the organization because mm-hmm. I am a building rep. Can't you, help me with this bullying? What do you have in your bag of tricks out there? And at that time, they didn't have anything. And the person would tell me, we're all bullied by the older adults here. So if we could get your book, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the bookstore and buy a few copies. Because this would have been probably 8 months ago that I had the problem. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what to do with it. There wasn't anything in their policy around this. Mm-hmm. And so it's voted the end of this month, there's going to be a policy on how people are to behave in a kind way towards each other and no harassment. And mm-hmm. this is what we're going to do, A, B, C, and D.
Steps.
No one's told me I'm responsible for that, but there's also high discrimination in the place. Everyone who looks like me is either serving the food or they're mowing the lawn. So there's very few Hispanic Native American people there except for those that do those services. So I haven't felt that, but the people in my building now that are there that are Hispanic have been telling me they feel that. So with this one person in particular, when she started calling, so I got no help from the HOA. When she started calling all my workplaces, I knew I had to do something. I never wanted to say anything to her.
Oh, so the woman with the cane is calling your workplaces?
Yeah, she called every workplace that I have except for my clients. She does. I help older adults age in community, and she doesn't know their names, so she couldn't call them. But she called. I'm a Stephen minister, so she called my church and complained about me. She called. I volunteer for the city and county of Denver. And she called there to complain about me, and that's a person I work with. So it came right back to me, and I realized at that point, this is harassment now. And I knew she was well aware of what she was doing, whether she has dementia or not dementia, and I needed to do something because it was impacting the way I could take care of my dad. And
yeah, there's a certain level of cognition there because she's able to find out these numbers and stuff. But let's look at the behavior of her sort of getting in people's faces with the cane, and we got to get rid of these liberals and all of that, because there's a lot of behavioral there. But let's talk about that one. So what do people think? What's going on with her? What's the underlying need? Why she would continually get into people's face complaining about liberals and we need to get rid of liberals and then using the cane? I mean, what might be going on there with her? Yes.
I just wonder if that's a situation of somebody feeling that there isn't enough to go around, and maybe that could be their space, but some kind of lacking resources in a sense, and feels like their space is being intruded on, and maybe that lends itself to low self-esteem in themselves, maybe previously have been bullied in a sense, but not having enough to go around sticks out for me as what may be going on in the lady's situation.
Yeah, so maybe there's sort of a sense of scarcity of resources or whatever, and she's feeling in competition with other people, especially these liberal people, and it's coming out of that dynamic, feeling that, there's not enough to go around. I don't want to share with these people who are so different from me. Is that what you're thinking? Yeah, that could be what's going on. Other ideas? Yes.
I think it'd be interesting to just sit down and to find out more history about her life and where it could be coming from, because we can guess all day long, but to actually sit and talk with someone and do some kind of trauma-informed care type of questions and find out if there's a possibility that there's a trauma in the history that could be causing that. Maybe she had a traumatic event with someone who was more of a liberal person, and now there's fear related to that trauma.
Yeah, and I think that point is well taken, that, we don't have enough information about her to really understand what's going on. This is just an exercise in the kind of things that we would want to think about. But yeah, part of what we want to do is sit down and talk with her and learn about her life. And there's some research out there about women in nursing homes who were traumatized as children back in the day when we didn't really do anything about that. We didn't really care anything about that. They had no intervention, no treatment or whatever, and went through their life just fine. But then they come to the nursing home and they're in that dependent state again where somebody has to dress them, has to clean their peri area. Sometimes they have a man cleaning that area, and it brings out all those earlier feelings and experience of being traumatized, and they're hitting and resisting care, and it comes from that history of trauma. And who knows, she may have had trauma in her past, and something about living in this setting with you all is bringing that out, and knowing more about her history and who she is as a person may help with more insight into what makes her tick. Yeah.
Well, and she's shaking her cane, which is symbolic of her loss of mobility. And so by using that as a expletive of what she's saying and doing.
Yeah, that's a good point, because she could be leaning on her cane and using her finger, but she's waving her cane around, which makes me wonder how much does she really need that cane. But anyway, that's neither here or there, because sometimes what we have to do is take away the mobility device if they don't really need it, and then they can't wave it around. But that sort of is maybe defeating the purpose of what's the underlying issue. So certainly knowing more about her would help. Other ideas?
Sort of just going off what you guys said too, I'm sort of seeing it as a defense mechanism, projecting her feelings on to her, essentially, maybe from that trauma, that loss. Maybe she had, a history with someone of that background that she's projecting now onto another individual because of that trauma or history. So
yeah, and it seems like she's trying to align people to her point of view. We've got to do something about those liberals. Join me in this fight against these liberals. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, that she's waving her cane around, and let's do something about these liberals. So she's having some kind of problem there, feeling isolated around that, and is trying to build an alliance. So what kind of need might be going there? Yeah.
I mean, we're all just guessing, but for me, it feels like maybe she feels a loss of sense of place, so that she has lost a certain amount of control, or on who she's sharing her life with and sharing her space with, and she maybe never interacted with other folk before, so she's kind of lost control of her sense of place, of where she, and is acting out in that way. But
yeah, she doesn't feel sort of like she belongs there. Yeah. She doesn't have a sense of how
so if she doesn't feel like she belongs, then it's the other people who don't belong, because then she'll belong.
Right, and she's trying to find people who belong to her, her camp. Yeah, so I mean, these are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about it. And the point is well taken. We're just engaging in an exercise, and we can't really figure it out until we actually, are there and talk to her. But these are the kinds of things we want to think about. Yeah.
I have 2 points on this. One is political. 50 years ago, politics were not what they are now. And I think a lot of the elderly people are confused by that, because back in the 60s is when we got the Older American Act, and it really showed that there was care, because before that time, some of the places that people were kept was not pretty. So she may have, or people of this age may have lived through that and realized that their loved ones were not cared for well, and they may be going in the same direction. So there's a lot of confusion for them about what it was 50 years ago and what it may be becoming now.
Yes, it's a good point. And I don't know I'd want to talk with her more about this concern about liberals. And how I was saying that one of the things I do is I invite people to, come in and, instead of talking about this and shaking your cane with everybody else, come in and talk with me. Let's have a conversation about liberals and just hear what is that struggle there and what are you afraid of and what's going on, and just give her a place to talk about that. And again, not agreeing or reinforcing, but just validating. I'm hearing that that's a real struggle for you, and it's hard in this environment with people who have those ideas. That's uncomfortable for you. Just validating where she's coming from, and just even that may help her feel like. Oh, yeah, this place isn't so bad. There's somebody here that understands my point of view. I don't know. But that's one thing I would want to do. But if there's any dementia there, she'd likely forget about the conversation and it may go back. So it might be having to have that conversation quite often. So that's just something that to my mind about her that I'd want to find out more why it's, because she could be talking about anything. We've got to get rid of this group or that group, but for her specifically liberal. So is she hearing something on the television that's frightening her? I don't know. We heard about how politics today, there's a lot out on in the media about negativity. So I don't know. So those are some ideas about what might be going on with her. What ideas do you have about interventions or things that might be tried to address that situation and reduce that behavior by meeting her underlying need? Yes.
One question I have is this an example of somebody who's a loner and bullying, or is there someone who's supported by the majority of the residents? So I think that would help us try to problem solve.
Say again? Loner. She's a loner, so she's just doing this on her own. She hasn't got anybody in her, she doesn't have any sidekicks yet.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those things that you suggested, trying to get a buy-in from other residents, see something, say something program, or a program that's based on positive aspects of trying to treat people in a more polite way. I know that might not be with the population that you're dealing with. I know that might be hard to introduce in the beginning, but I think that's something that's valid.
Yes, some of those organizational interventions might help. And I know one thing that you are doing is putting policy, rules in place, and that's certainly an important step. I think I'll let somebody else speak because the microphone went back. Oh, it went back to the microphone holder. So there wasn't anybody waiting to speak.
Sure, I'll make a comment.
Okay, sounds good.
Why not? I think that with somebody who may be lonely and then they're seeing that other people have visitors, that could be a potential conversation piece. Maybe they're missing companionship. Maybe they're missing purpose and meaning in their daily life. Maybe they're missing their previous home. Maybe there's grief and loss, as you had touched on earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. There may be grief and loss there may be loneliness, and I think there's something that might be considered as like inviting her out to coffee, inviting her out for whatever it is you do. That's what I do, is go out for coffee, but it could be, let's go out and get a cookie or something, and just invite her to do a benign social event. And just because she's not a friend doesn't mean you can't reach out as a friend and just see if it helps. And it might be like, and if she starts talking about liberals, then it's, and ranting and raving, then it's like, oh, well, it's been nice having coffee, and you just end it, and maybe try again later. But I wonder if just reaching out in friendship, might do something for her if she is feeling lonely and isolated, and part of what she's trying to do is make a connection in a misguided way. Other ideas that people have? Yes, there's one in the back.
This wasn't so much my idea as your idea, but I think your idea about making at least with part of it, as far as making agreements, making an agreement with her, giving her a place to vent. It's giving her that attention, validating her feelings, and then hopefully that would kind of lessen the outbursts, if you will.
Yeah, if she has an appropriate way to vent those frustrations, I mean, it may help. And I don't know how that could be arranged. I don't know the setup of your housing, if there's a resident services coordinator or something like that who could be an ear for her. But that's one way. Any other ideas? Well, it sounds like some positive things are happening, and I hope the rules the policies and procedures will help. How about one other thing that you're struggling with, situation with bullying in one of your organizations? We have time for one more.
I could use some ideas on how to get facilities like assisted living to buy into these kind of things, the advantages of instating programs like this. That we can kind of help sell them to assisted livings that we work with.
What are some of the pushback you're getting, why they don't want to?
They just don't think the person in question will change, and that the culture has been like this for a long time, so they don't see the benefit of trying to change it.
Yeah, so they don't see any point into doing it. Why do any intervention? It's just going to be the same. So part of it is convincing them that there can be some change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so how do we do that? Did you want to say something?
I just want to add to that. I think some of the culture that we've seen too is that just lack of sense of community and involving the people, the residents themselves, in creating the community and creating choice. And I think that just can stymie creativity and thinking outside the box when we're really thinking about what all the house rules that we don't want people to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, creating that buy-in and how do you sell intervention programs, I think just pointing out as you find them, organizations that have had success and forefronting that. Certainly the interventions that I presented, I presented them because the people who are doing them had promising results from them. So that's something that can be showcased. And I'm not here to be go buy my book. I don't mean that at all, but there is information in there that can be helpful to introduce to organizations that this was instituted in an assisted living facility. It did take a year or so, but afterwards people were getting along better, they were happier, and just the work that Diana Benson is doing with civility training and all the things that came out of that with the Neighborhood Watch program and the bartering system and just the sense of community and how it reduced the negativity. Those are good examples. And I think comments like, Rome wasn't built in a day and all those types of things, you have to emphasize that there's no quick fix. And it's a process to institute cultural change, but it's a process that's good, and we can make forward steps. And even small gains are useful. And I know that what I've seen in my own work, and this is something that you can use too, is that when you're involving the residents in the discussions and you're hearing their stories and you're planning with them and you're trying to do an intervention, just the knowledge that administration is aware of the problem of bullying and antagonistic behaviors and problem peer relations, that they're aware of that they're trying to do something about it, is comforting to people. So that's something you can say as well. There's an element of comfort, just that the facility's trying, even if it hasn't had any effect yet. So that's a good thing to point out as well.
And I would add to that, involve your local ombudsman.
Yes, the ombudsman, very good.
Free training.
Yeah, I think too, I think that's a good point, using other stakeholders to help reinforce that message. And the residents themselves, we want change. I think that can be helpful. And I think sometimes what I've seen with providers is sort of the idea that there's so many other bigger problems. Bullying is not a problem. I mean, sticks and stones may break my bones. I mean, people just need to get a backbone. I mean, sometimes you hear that kind of talk, and then pointing out, but there's so many negative outcomes associated with people's reactions to bullying, the social isolation, the anger, the depression, and all of that. We need to address it. So it's a good question. Yes.
Just to add to that, because I know at my nursing home, we recently started in the past 2 months an anti-bullying program, and we had the same worries too about how do we get the bullies involved, how do we get staff involvement, because our approach too wasn't just about the residents bullying each other, it's about our staff bullying each other, and having a lot of problems with that. And so I know myself, our administrator, a lot of the upper management, we had conversations with people just one-on-one before we even started something to gain interest. And I talked with bullies every time I was going to them about behaviors and what they were doing, and just point blank, don't you want to live better? Don't you want to be happier? Because it doesn't seem to me like you are. And they were really honest that they weren't, and they wanted to be a part of change. And we really phrased it, starting with trying to create a code of conduct of how we wanted things to look. And I don't want to create this for you guys. I want you to create it for yourselves. So the more people that come and are involved, the better it's going to look, and the more realistic it's going to be achieved because you're creating it. And talking with staff about it, and a lot of staff, I don't have time, I don't know what I can do, but showing them that we had so many resident-to-resident altercations happening, verbal and physical, and just the atmosphere in our dining room was like a middle school dining room, and all these things, and then tying it back to them and how they are interacting with staff, how we haven't gotten new staff, or somebody starts and then they last a week but then get bullied out. Showing them that these things are affecting them, it got the buy-in really easily. And I mean, we've been holding weekly meetings, and it's in our dining room and it's full. It's tons of residents, tons of the targets, tons of the bullies, and a lot of staff. And it's been huge how many changes we've made and success that we've had with it because of that.
Yeah, so that's a wonderful intervention. I'm so glad that you shared that. And it was about getting the buy-in that, hey, this is affecting you. It's making you miserable. Don't you want to change that?
Exactly, just being honest with people of I don't want to live this way. I don't want to work in this setting where I feel attacked by staff or where I feel attacked by residents. And don't you just want to get along with people? And not saying you have to be friends with everybody, not saying we all have to be buddy-buddy, but we can all be civil and we can all get along.
That's it. Civility doesn't mean you have to, be friends with people you don't want to be friends with, but you can still be decent.
Yeah.
So good. Well, I hope that continues to go well. And I think it's one of the things, the benefits of doing that in a nursing home environment is you have regulations that back that up, that we're supposed to provide a home-like environment. And not that homes are, devoid of bullying, but the idea is that's, in a pleasant home, you're not having that going
Right.
on.
And it's been really easy too to show how it's been working, because I can say from our nursing home, in January and February, we had over 20 incidents that we had to report of physical aggression or verbal aggression. In March, when we started the program, we had 2. So it's just very easy data to show that this does affect things, and this shows that administration's aware of stuff, so bullies aren't feeling like they can continue this way. We are doing trainings with staff about how to intervene and what to notice, because they just may not be aware and stuff. Even our complaints, we used to have over 30 complaints a month, now they're down to like 10.
Yeah, that's
So
remarkable.
There's very easy
improvement.
things to show that it's working and it's helping, so. Oh. Thank you, Cindy. I'm with Harmony Point Nursing Center. We're part of Vivage. So I know we've been doing a lot with our own Vivage Corporation, trying to teach this program and get more buy-in and stuff. So if anyone wants to see me, happy to help talk about what we're doing. And
yeah, and I mean, take her up on that offer, because I think part of this is learning from each other, sharing our successes with each other, sharing our failures. You know, hey, we tried this and it was a complete disaster, but we did this and it worked really well. And I think that's part of something that can be really helpful, because we all have expertise to share and can learn from one another. And I think even taking a step beyond that, you know, if there's a newsletter for your organizations, if there's local conferences to write up, here's what we did, here's how to do it, here's the results, you know, present it at local conferences, and then that can be shared with the people that you're mentioning. Like, well, you know, look at this article in XYZ newsletter about what they did at this facility and how it helped. Or I was at this presentation at XYZ conference and look at what they did. And so those are ways to showcase success as well. So.
And I would just really emphasize with people, like, hope about it, because I know we were all negative too, thinking that it wouldn't get off or what would change or whatever. But if you just have the idea that it's of hope and that there could be change and how exciting what could come from it.
Yeah, and part of it is instilling that hope into other people, and it sounds like you were able to do that. We can do this, people. So great. Right, any other last comments? We have about 3 minutes. Okay, well, thank you so much. I love being with you here today, and thank you for your attention and for your input and your sharing. It was very good. Here's this book that I signed for, I forgot whose it was, but it's up here for you to pick up. And have a good evening, everybody.